Hi and welcome to this build video of the Outrage Velocity 90 from helituning.com. We're starting off on page 1 of the manual. Well, actually it's page 2 of the manual. Page 1 is just telling you that the radio controlled helicopter is not a toy. Page 2 we get into the actual build details, and we're at the top of page 2 on main bag 1. And these are the pieces you're going to need to put together this very first build step at the top of the page. I'll quickly run through the items we got here. We've got our flybar seesaw, which is this piece here, feathering spindle, our head block. These are our dampers, and I've actually got both sets of dampers here. These grey ones are beginner sport flying dampers, the black ones are the harder dampers for 3D. We've got some shouldered bolts for our flybar seesaw. We've got some balls to go on the flybar seesaw, and then these little things here, the grub screws, they go through the center here and bite onto the feathering spindle, and then these little round-headed cap bolts, they go either side here and here, and on the other side of this head block, so it's the same both sides, in order to hold this bearing in place. Now the rest of the stuff you see at the top of that page has already been pre-installed and done for you. So the bearings and stuff are already fitted in there. The spindle driver is already down inside the head there in place, and the bearings that they show fitting are already done. So I'm going to get into this, and the first thing I'm going to do is put the spindle, sorry, not the spindle, the flybar seesaw into place, and use these shouldered bolts to tighten it up. Okay, so there we have our flybar seesaw installed. The shouldered bolt is through here and the same on the other side. And also note the orientation of the seesaw. You have the holes here to the left and the big flat here to the right when you stand it like this. And that's that particular piece done. So the next thing is to get our feathering spindle through our head block, which goes down through here. Just need to make sure that the spindle driver inside the head block is aligned, and you can do that just by putting a Allen key down inside there and just do that with it, and that lines it up, and you should then be able to put the feathering spindle down through the spindle driver. And then when you've got it in there, note that the feathering spindle has actually got a flat spot on it either side, and there's one on the other side as well, and that's what our grub screws are going to go through this hole here. They're going to go through there and bite onto that flat spot, and you should be able to see that through the hole. So you need to line it up, get it in place, and then we've got our two fairly big grub screws that I showed you earlier, these fellas, and they go down through the middle of that hole and bite onto the feathering shaft. Okay, and there we have our spindle installed, and you can see it rocks slightly on the spindle driver. The next thing to do is to put the two little cap-headed bolts into here, and the same on the other side, just to hold this piece, because it's loose, it will move backwards and forwards, just to hold that piece in place. Also remember, Loctite on all screws that are metal to metal, so the ones that went through here, the grub screws into there, and the little button headed bolts that will go in here, Loctite on those to make sure they don't come undone. Okay, and there we have the button head bolts in place, and the same on the other side. So now we're in a position to get the dampers and slide them down the feathering spindle and into our head, and then the next step is to put the balls onto the flybar seesaw here, and we'll be using the middle hole here, which is the recommended hole to start off with. Okay, you can see I've just got the dampers on my feathering shaft here, and you'll also notice that they're rather shiny and glistening, and so is the shaft towards the head block as well. and that's because I've added some silicone grease onto these to make them slide into the head a bit better and to stop the rubber in the damper from binding to the metal on the head once they're in place. Make sure that you put the dampers onto the shaft first, so that they aren't covered in grease and you get grease in the ends of your feathering shaft here, because you don't want any grease in there. So put them on dry, then grease them up once they're on a little way, and then push them in. Okay, and then once you've fitted those dampers, they should look like this, and they pretty much sit flush here. Now when you're actually sliding these down the shaft, you'll find they are quite a tight fit, which is why you're using the silicone grease. And I found the easiest way to kind of push them into the head is to use something like these, a set of ball link pliers, and just use the flat underside here just to apply pressure, equally around the edges to push it down into the head, and it should go down fairly quickly and nice and flush, like that. So the next thing is to fit the ball either side on the arm. So it's this little ball here, so we're going to fit that into that middle hole there, either side, one on the other side as well here. Okay, so there we go, there's the ball fitted that side and the same the other side. And the other thing I've just done is there's a brass spacer that goes up against the damper. Put those on just for safekeeping to get them out of the way. What you'll notice when you put these on is that they have one side that's got like a little chamfer on the edge, and the other side is completely flat, and you want the completely flat unchamfered edge against the damper in the head block, and then just slide it down like that up against the damper, and same the other side, and that will just keep those out of the way and safe so they don't roll off and get lost. Okay, and that's the first build step at the top of the page. We'll now move on to the second build step directly underneath it, which is assembling our flybar cage and putting our flybar into place. Okay, so these are the bits we're going to need for the next part of the install, which is our flybar cage, and you'll find these bits in the foam tray. Just pop those out. And the screws to go with them are with one of these inside the little foam trays. With regard to the flybar, sorry, not the flybar, the ball links and the rods for this bit you should find tucked down behind the main shaft in one of the foam inserts, and the ball links themselves, there's a little packet like this. You can see the number on there, which has got the ball links for the head in it, and similarly the packet that's got the rods for the head, which is tucked behind the main shaft, looks like that. So I'll just give you a little hand in finding those because it took me a while to find them. And of course we've got our flybar here along the bottom. So the main thing here is to basically put that like that, and then the two pieces go between like that, and then we bolt it together with these screws here. Put the flybar through, and make sure that we've got our rod and ball link fitted on here before we bolt all this up. And obviously this cage needs to be inserted around our rotor head that we built earlier, but I'll show you that as we go along. Okay, just a very quick tip here on getting the ball link started on the rod. If you just try to screw these links onto the rod, you'll find it's really quite difficult to get them on, because there's a really snug fit on the hole here. So in order to get these started, just get a knife like this, put it in the end of the ball link, give it a run around like so, just to open up the outside of the hole a little bit, and then you should be able to get the rod in there and it started pretty good. Okay, so here we have the completed assembly of the flybar cage. You can see the ball link and rod is installed onto the shaft here. We've got our cage inserted around our flybar seesaw and the flybar placed through. There are grub screws in the top here to lock the flybar in place. You need to make sure that the flybar is centered so you've got the same sticking out either side in terms of length of flybar. It is made easier by the fact that there are flats on the flybar, so you can look down through this hole and line it up so it's reasonably close, and then it just takes a little bit of adjustment to get it perfect. With regard to where to put the screws, I'll try and show you this. There we go. You can see it's in the middle hole on the seesaw. And with regard to lengths, this little gap here is 5.75 millimeters as per the instructions on page 6 of the manual for intermediate settings, which is how I'm setting up this machine. Okay, so that's the flybar seesaw done. The next thing in the manual is, well, let's have a look. We can see here it's putting together the swash plate and the washout base that I showed in the overview video with the bearings within it and the washout arms. Okay, so here we have our next build step. We've got a swash plate with the balls to fit onto it, and then these little screws go underneath with the washer, which I can just quickly show you. There's 3 holes underneath here which those little screws and washers go into, and then we've got to put a ball onto each of our washout arms, and then we use these long screws to mount the arms onto the washout base. And this of course is our washout base with the little rollers on it for the pins on the bottom of the rotor head, which I showed in the overview video. Okay, so that's everything. So let's start by fitting up our swash plate with the various balls. Okay, so here we have our swash plate fitted up with the balls. The longer balls go on the outside and the shorter balls go on the inside, of course with Loctite. We've got our 3 little screws and washers in the bottom of the swash plate as well. And the other thing to take a note of is where these balls here go on the swash plate for your 120 degree CCPM, and basically you can see from here that they go towards the rear peg, holes closest to the rear ball. If you look at it from the front here, you can see that as well, that this front hole here and the hole towards the front here are not used. Okay, so we've now assembled the washout base and the swash plate, and something I want to show you, which is the first problem I've come across on the model, is all these screws here don't have any Loctite on, so I've been taking them out and putting Loctite on them and screwing them back in. This one here, when I took it out, it was very loose. Put some Loctite on it, started screwing it back in, it started to tighten up, and then the screw completely sheared off, and I was applying really not very much pressure to this screw at all at the time, really not you know, doing a ham-fisted approach and tightening it up. So these are really quite a soft screw by the look of it, so when you take these out and put them back in, be really careful that you don't put too much pressure on them. And as I say, I really wasn't putting much pressure on this, and it just completely sheared off, which is a bit of a nightmare because it means I can't get this swash plate apart now. It's going to have to stay like it is. That aside, with the washout base, make sure that you take all of these screws out and put Loctite on those. When I went through them, only 2 of those had Loctite on. Similarly, the little screws here, no Loctite on those, so I've Loctited those as well. And also when you install the screws here into the washout base, obviously Loctite those and the ball that you fit. With regards to the ball, it goes in the outside hole for the intermediate settings, and that should be fine. Okay, so here we have our next step, which is the main shaft. We're going to put the main shaft into the head block, secure it with our Jesus bolt and nylock nut, and then these 2 button head bolts go through the side of the head block and just pinch onto the shaft to hold it in place. Now with regard to the shaft, you'll notice that one end has got 2 holes in it and the other has got 1, and basically it's the 2 holes that go up into the head block. and I'll just go ahead and do that, and then put the swash plate and washout base on as well. Okay, so there we have our main shaft installed into the head. We've got the Jesus bolt going through one hole, and then the bolts in the side going into the other hole. Loctite on these, of course, because they do thread into the shaft itself. Okay, and there we have our swash plate and washout mounted onto the shaft, with the pins on the bottom of the head running through those bearings on the side of the washout base. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is fit the blade grips and the upper mixers and do all the work for the basically for the blade grips and connecting up the other rods to the from the swash plate up to the blade grips and the upper mixer arms. Okay, so here we have the parts for the next build step. The blade grips with the double radial bearings down in here, and then there's also another radial bearing the other side here before you get to the thrust races, which are over here, and our thrust washers. So you've actually got 3 radial bearings per blade grip and a single thrust race. These are our blade grip arms and the bolts for bolting them onto these holes here, so this fits onto here. We've got our upper mixers, and they've actually fit onto here, and the various balls and screws for fitting those onto there. And then these are our feathering spindle bolts and washers for bolting the blades to, onto our head. So those are all the parts, and the first thing I'm going to do is put together the upper mixers and bolt those onto the blade grip arms. Okay, here we have our upper mixers, and you can see that you fit the balls to the same side as the bearing protrudes from, or the bearing housing with the bearing in it protrudes from. Now you do need to make a choice when you make up your upper mixer arms as to which type of ball you fit on the longer length of the arm here. Now the shorter one gives you just a standard pitch range, collective pitch range, and a standard cyclic pitch range, and the longer ball will allow you to have extended collective and cyclic pitch range should you want it, and I do want that, so I've gone for the longer ball here. And for intermediate settings, they both go in the center hole on the mixer arm, and then we can just bolt these onto our blade grip arms using these longer bolts. By the way, all the screws in the kit tend to have some engineering oil on them, so make sure you clean them off before you try and install them and Loctite them into the machine, because that engineering oil will cause the Loctite to fail. Okay, and here we have our completed blade grip arms with the upper mixer arm installed. And you can see the longer arm, or the longer ball here on the outside, shorter ball on the inside, and these can now be screwed onto our blade grips. We have the blade grip here, and basically the way these go is they go on like that effectively. So let's just turn that around so you can see, so like that. So I'll put both of those onto the blade grips and come back and show you. Okay, and there we have our 2 completed blade grips with the blade grip arms fitted. And now what remains is to install the thrust races into the grips and then bolt the grips onto the completed rotor head or head block that we were working on earlier. So next thing, I was just going to show you the correct way to assemble the thrust races. Okay, so here we have our blade grip, and this is the order that the various pieces of the thrust race need to go into the blade grip. So this is our open blade grip. First thing to go in is the thrust washer. The next thing to go in is the outer edge of the ball race that has the larger hole in the middle, and you can check these just by putting these onto the feathering shaft and waggling them backwards and forwards, and you'll find that one will waggle much more than the other, and that's the one with the largest hole in it. So that one goes next, the one with the largest hole. Then our ball race itself goes in, and this goes in such that when you put it into the grip you can see this side of the race, not the other side. I'll just show you what the other side looks like. It's the open part of the race. So when you put this in, you want to be able to see that part of the race when you look down into the grip. And then the smaller thrust race goes in, the one with the smaller hole in it, and then after that we have our feathering spindle bolt with the washer on it. Make sure that you grease up this thrust race as well, so just get some silicone grease and push it in around the balls here before you put it into the grip. Okay, so here we have the blade grips fitted to the rotor head, and as usual it's quite difficult to show this because of the flybar getting in the way of me being able to display it. But you can see there the blade grip is fitted, the upper mixer arm in place. When you put the feathering spindle bolts into the feathering spindle, make sure you use a good degreaser to degrease the bolts, and also put some tissue down inside the feathering spindle bolt thread, sorry, the feathering spindle thread on the feathering spindle itself to clean out the inside of the feathering spindle, because normally there's some engineering grease down in there, which there was on mine. So make sure you really clean that up, so that when you Loctite the screws and put them in, they're going to hold, and they're not going to be trying to hold onto grease that's down inside the feathering shaft. Okay, so that's that part of the install done. Next thing is to fit the rods onto the rotor head. Okay, and here we have those rods, and just a couple of measurements to give you. I'm using the intermediate settings. So we've got a gap of 5.5 millimeters in here, and for this much longer rod we've got a gap of 83.25 millimeters from here to here, as per the settings on page 6 of the manual for intermediate. So I'll now fit those onto the head. Okay, and there we have the completed rotor head with all of the links installed, and let's try to give you a bit of a look at that. Now these ball links are really hard to click onto the balls, so make sure you've got a decent set of ball link pliers in order to click them on. And the links actually do feel quite stiff, but they should bed in quite quickly in the first couple of flights. But, nice powerful servos will overcome that stiffness on a 90, and they should loosen up quite quickly. Okay, so that's the build up of the rotor head almost completed. We've got one last couple of steps to do. One is we haven't put the head button on the top of the head block, and the other thing we need to do is on the end of our flybar there is obviously no paddle, so we've got to install the paddle. So that's the next couple of things. Okay, so I have now quickly installed the head button, which I can just show you there. You can see the head button installed. Just one screw and some Loctite, and that's it. So let's just get that out of the way for the moment and focus on these, because these are the paddles for the 90, and they have a couple of little grub screws which go into this hole here. Let me just get a bit of a tighter angle on this so you can see it a bit better. Okay, so we have a little hole here that the grub screw goes into, or if you mount your flybar into the rear hole, there's a hole here that the grub screw goes into. Now what I'd recommend is that you do put the flybar into the front hole unless you want really fast cyclic response, in which case you can use the rear hole. But I'm actually going to use this front hole here and put the grub screw in the front there. These have to be screwed onto the flybar, and then we need the same gap between the edge of the paddle and the edge of the flybar cage either side, so that we know that they're centered on the head and not going to give us a balance issue or a wobble on the head in the hover. So I'll go ahead and install those. Okay, so here we have the paddle, well, both paddles installed, and the gap that I ended up with here between here and here was 188 millimeters. I screwed the paddle on until it felt fairly tight, and then measured the gap, and it was about 188, and then I put the paddle on the other side, screwed it down, got tighter around about the same spot, evened them out, and then tightened up the grub screw. Now remember, this grub screw is in plastic down here, so you don't want to put any Loctite on that. It's literally, you know, screw it down till it bites. Don't go too mad because you'll strip the plastic thread. You just need it to just bite a little bit just to stop the paddle from twisting. And that's pretty much it. That's the completed Outrage Rotorhead, and we can now move on. And the next thing in the manual is that we start building up the mainframes. So that's the next thing on the agenda, is putting together one of the mainframes, and by the look of the manual it's the right hand mainframe that we start building up initially and install the internals of the machine onto, and then after we built that up we then put the left hand frame on afterwards.